Hello folks, and welcome back again. Sorry it's been a while, but I've been battling a 30-year-old micro-channel architecture PC which has been causing all kinds of trouble with its hard drives. I have yet another SCSI drive on the way, and fingers crossed it'll be the one to get me over the finish line. Meanwhile, one of my subscribers, going by King Douchebag, whose profile pic seems to be a chicken with a fish head smoking a cigarette, had watched the video where I slapped a Morpheus 8057 cooler on my AGP HD 3850 and asked, "Do you think that you'll revisit the HD 3850 with the Akasa Vortexx Neo? I know you've used it on another GPU, but I'm still curious." I figured, why the heck not? They're only £9.95 on eBay, and ordered another one. Yesterday I finally got around to switching them over, and I think he'll be quite happy with the results. Before we get to those though, there is a fair amount of work you may need to do, so if you have a Sapphire card like I do, the following video will give you an idea of what you have to look forward to if you want to fit this cooler. After removing the redonkulous Morpheus cooler, you can see here how the Morpheus backplate was squashing down on the thermal pad around the bridge chip. The chip seems fine still, so not a cause for concern, but worth pointing out if you were considering the Morpheus. After that, I now have to remove the copper memory heatsink I made, as it just won't fit under the cooler, then replace all the thermal pads to test the fit of the Vortexx Neo. I left the film on under the Neo at this point, as I wanted to see how much contact I was getting with the GPU die. It's a bit tricky doing this with the camera in your face, but all the legs line up and go through the holes. Just eyeballing it, I can see that it isn't quite sitting flush though, and as you can see here, there is minimal contact between the die and the copper heatsink base, so I'm going to try again, but after removing the aluminium plate that helps cool down the RAM chips. Ah, I found the reason why it doesn't sit properly. This heatsink towards the back of the card. Other than that, it looks like it should fit without issue, so the next question is, what do I do about this? Meanwhile, somebody else asked another question on the card querying the memory chips, so here is a close-up of one of the chips. Well, we need to get this heatsink off and make it shorter somehow. First, I tried with a small sander. That was completely useless, so I tried a file. That was just as useless and infinitely more painful on the fingers. Instead, I decided the easiest thing would probably be to just bend the fins over, so that's what I did. Mostly out of focus. This is what it looked like after I'd done all the bending. But the central fin still needed sorting out, as it was still pretty much as tall as it had ever been. That's when I got out the hacksaw. Right, the fins should now give a lot more clearance, so let's put it all back together. Apart from we can't yet, as the fins bent over on the two ends now hit capacitors. Back to the hacksaw. As you can see, I've now chopped out some chunks to allow clearance of the caps on the board. After popping it all together for a test fitting, you can now see plenty of clearance. Something to mention at this point is the broken plastic on the cooler. This is pretty much a given on this old stock, though from what I can tell it doesn't really matter. You may have to rebuild some of the plastic shards with superglue before finishing assembly. A bit of a clean, remove the film, add fresh thermal paste, clip in the heatsink, put it all together. Once you have it in your system, the thing you completely overlooked raises its head. The Vortexx Neo fan needs power, and it isn't going to get it from the graphics card. It needs a spare motherboard fan header, so you may have to invest in a splitter, or if there isn't a spare header within reach of the cooler cable, you may need an extension like I'm popping in here. Once that's sorted, spend 4 minutes faffing about with Molex power cables, and we're off. Install your drivers. In this case, I'm going with Catalyst 10.7 drivers. A reboot, and let's start testing temps. To start with my temp testing, I'm going to put it through a trial by fire of the Crisis benchmark set to medium settings at 1080p. Let's see what that did for us. Average FPS of 38.39, which is very respectable. But what about the temps? Well, it looks like a minimum of 32 and maximum of 47. But if I want to add to the chart I did before, I need to run the same tests as I ran when I compared the other coolers. So, same as before, I'm going to stress test it through a version of FurMark so old it's still called Fur Rendering Benchmark version 1. I have it set to 1080p and 5 minutes again for a decent stress test. Now, it's been mentioned to me several times that FurMark is really not something you should use on old cards, so this will be its last outing for me. I don't want to accidentally overcook a prized GPU. So, what do we have for results? A high of 54 degrees coming from an idle temp of only 31. For a £10 cooler, that is really outstanding. And if we insert those scores into the older chart, we can see it performs comparably with the Morpheus using a single fan. Idle temps are somehow the lowest out of all of them, and maximum temps are still 30 off the stock cooler while being far, far quieter. The temperature difference is probably because I'm using a far better airflow setup to when I tested before. Well, thank you, King Douchebag. That was a fantastic suggestion, and I hope that you and anyone else wanting to cool a 3850 considers the Akasa Vortexx Neo. In the UK, they're £9.95 on eBay and £15 on Amazon. I'd suggest Amazon if you want them intact, but eBay if you don't mind a little reconstructive surgery to the plastic and want to save £5. Well, I already have the next video on the go. I have a new challenger to the reigning AGP champ turn up, and I'm looking forward to seeing exactly which will win in some head-to-head gameplay and benchmarking comparisons. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.